I'm going to be speaking today in John chapter 2, and in chapter 2, John is coming from chapter 1, of course, because, starts with 1 and then it goes to 2. But I'm just being silly. But he's talking in that first chapter about this, these couple of days that happen where he comes face to face with Jesus, and he's saying, "This is Christ. This is the Messiah." And so he, in that chapter, he goes from paragraph to paragraph, saying, like, and then the next day or the day after. And so we start chapter 2 here, and he says, on the third day. So in verse 1, chapter 2, verse 1, on the third day, or what this means is like 2 days later, as I'm looking at this. So like on the third day, it was like this day, and then 2 days later after that. So it's, you follow me? So it's like he's leading us on this journey of a handful of days where all of a sudden these things are happening, where he comes face to face with Christ and cries out and speaks that this is the Son of God. And it jumps into chapter 2 here in verse 1. It says, on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. In verse 2, it says, now, both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And you guys know that we've been in these messages where we're talking about Jesus being invited, and he always went, as we see in these scriptures, where he was invited. He didn't refuse. He didn't say no. He didn't, he wasn't like, I'm not going to show up. He went. And it tells us specifically here, and this is a different kind of a story, because the other ones that we see, which are actually later after this, but we see an individual or a person inviting Jesus into their home or inviting them to come and seeing those miracles happen. But this one, he was just invited to a wedding. Invited to this event, and it says his mother was there, and disciples were invited. And in this, we have to see that just before this, he's like fresh from this moment, this moment that he had where he was tempted by the devil. And so he's fresh from this moment of just personal conflict against him and who he is, where the devil's attacking him, and stepping now into this ministry. And he has to go through all these things. But he steps out from that into, he's like, I don't know if you're like me, but like when you go through something hard, or really, especially thinking about this, like really hard, that Jesus walked through, right? Being tempted after fasting for 40 days, and he's just there in that moment and just being attacked, and then coming out of that and stepping in right now to him ministering. But he's invited to this wedding, and look, weddings back in that day, they were a party. They were, and I know weddings today are parties too, but like, no, it was like days. It was the happening thing. It was something that really, we'll look a little bit later, that even if you didn't provide enough for this, basically this festival of marriage, that it was looked down upon, and actually this really bad thing for the family, for those that were providing this wedding ceremony and this feast. And Jesus was invited. And like I said, I don't know if you're like me, but like, man, I went through something hard and be like, I'm just going to take a break for a little bit. I'm just going to, you know what? I don't really feel like celebrating right now. And so I imagine this moment like, see, but he's not like us, right? He's not like me, where he needs that space, but coming fresh from that temptation. Just coming a small bit of time, now starting his ministry. He was invited to this wedding, and he went. And in verse 3, John 2:3, go straight into it. Says, and when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus responded, he said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." Then his mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says, you just do it." So here you have, so Mary, his mom's coming and saying, "Hey, look, we're at this wedding feast, and there's supposed to be food and drink provided for everybody and not run out, because it'll actually be something that is a mark against this family for forever, that they ran out and they've ran out of wine." And Jesus is like, in this, a couple of things. This word, when he says woman, there's something here that it's not just him saying like, woman, like we would think about it. This word actually, or this term used is more like saying ma'am or lady, or it was a greeting, or what you would call somebody that's not your mother. Okay? And in this moment, seeing this is interesting that he doesn't, and kind of out of place that he doesn't say mother. Because if it is your mother, you call them mother. But he says woman, or ma'am, or lady. And what's happening here, if we see this, is that, again, stepping into this new place of ministry that God is bringing him into, like walking through this toward the cross. And what he's saying, listen, without saying it, right? If I could give a bit of my own personal paraphrase of when he says woman, he's saying, Mom, listen, there's something different now. Things have changed, and so whenever you come to me, don't come to me as your natural son. And I'm not going to speak to you right now because of this change as your natural son or you as my natural mother, but I'm going to talk to you in this way of I am now in this place of ministry. And so he says, what does this have to do with you and I? Or what is this between us? And so what he's saying is like, listen, you can't come to me as mother and me being like obligated to do this as your son. Right? And he says later in John, it says that he will do nothing of his own will, but only what the Father tells him to do and wants him to do. It's like, I can't do that. And that's what he's saying in this. He's like, listen, I can't do this because my mom asked me. And then she turns to the servants and says, whatever he tells you to do, just do it. It's like she says, okay, I got it. You talk to your heavenly Father and then just do it, okay? Because I know that that's what needs to be done. You know, I don't know. That's, again, maybe that's kind of what happened. But she just turns to them. She's like, okay, I hear you. And just doesn't say anything else. And then she just turns and she's like, he's going to tell you something. And whatever he says, just do what he says. So we've got to think that in this moment, because of this interaction, this exchange, that he does have a moment of, it doesn't say that he prayed or did anything like that. But I believe that what it's telling us is he is having a moment with God saying, hey, is this what I'm supposed to do now? And God said, yes. So in this moment, like we see that he's separating himself from this natural relationship with his mother. Not completely, and I don't want you to take it that way, but saying, in my ministry, I'm not going to just be doing something because I feel that as a son of you, Mom, I need to do it, but I have to do what my Father is asking me to do. My Heavenly Father, God, is asking me to do. And when we come here in this, again, like I was saying about this wedding, that, even like back in that day, the rabbis, there was this thing that wine was considered like a picture of joy, right? And wine was a little different. I mean, it still was wine, but it was a little different back then, not quite as potent as it is today, but still, it was wine. But it had this picture of joy that when there was wine there, it was a drink that they had, and when it was there, then there was joy and happiness. And if there wasn't, if it ran out, it gave this picture that, like, to all them, that there was not going to be joy or happiness or goodness in that family. And I believe that in this, there's so many things that God, I believe, wants to speak to us. But I just want to say that there's natural kinds of joy, there's happiness, laughter, but then there's God, the joy of the Lord, right? And that is strength. It's not just having fun and laughing, but the joy of the Lord is our strength. The joy of the Lord is something that cannot be had by man, cannot be fabricated. You can't tell a joke and get this joy that God can give. And it's totally different, and it's so much better. And I believe that in this we see that this is one of the things that God is doing in this moment. So he says, Mom, can't do this just because of you. But then he ends up doing it. So in verse 6, John 2:6, it says, now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water, and they filled them up to the brim. So he goes on now, and he's, right? He's like, I can't do this just because of you're asking me, Mom. And she says, hey, servants, just do whatever he says because I know that he's going to do something. And then he turns around then after this moment, and he says, okay, there's these 6 water pots. And what these 6 water pots are is they actually are part of the law, the religious ceremony, right? It says that according to the manner of purification of the Jews, it was something that was set according to law for 1,000 years. Like this was something, and this is the law that they had there, these water pots, so they could cleanse themselves, so that they could, come in the right manner before God. And these were there at that ceremony, that place, that house, or wherever they were, and he saw them and said, I'm going to use those. And we can, I think, see in this that this is almost, I guess, a picture of what he is doing actually in the reality of what he says. He's like, I have come to fulfill the law. The law isn't what you need anymore. The law isn't what's going to get you what you need, but what is going to get you what you need is coming to me, Am I going to the cross, being able to be with you, that I am the new covenant? There was an old covenant, the water pots, but there's going to be a new covenant. And it's so interesting that this is the first one, this first sign that we see. And the first sign that we see is this old covenant and Jesus doing something in the moment. I almost, and it doesn't say this, but I believe that it's his first act of ministry and doing something miraculous is actually, I believe, a picture of what the cross is and what the cross is going to do. Man. Had these water pots. According to the law, right? The manner for the purification, for the cleansing, for them to come in a right manner before God. So he uses these, and it also specifically says, or actually in a more not super specific way, says that each of them contained 20 to 30 gallons apiece. 6 times 20 is 120. I'm pretty good at math, okay? 6 times 30 is 180, right? Gallons. And they filled them to the brim. So you have these water pots that each are 20 to 30 gallons of water, and they filled them to the brim. And this is what he used. And something here also is that he does look to the servants and he asks them to be a part of it. In these moments, there is a part that we play, and it doesn't create the miracle. It doesn't, make it happen. It's not something that we add to it that allows, this miracle to happen. It's all him, but he wants us to be a part of it. And something in here I see is that how much, or how well are we going to hear what he says, and how much are we going to stick to what he says and do it exactly like he says? Because he says, fill the water. He doesn't say like kind of fill. He doesn't say like halfway fill. When you say fill something, what does it mean? There shouldn't be any place for any more. Right? Like fill it up. And they went, and I love that it does specifically say that they filled them to the brim. I don't know how they carried them back, but even carrying a glass of water that's filled to the brim is really difficult, or coffee especially, because it's hot. You don't want to spill it on yourself. But anyway, they take these containers and they fill them to the brim where nothing else can be added. When Jesus is speaking to us about what he wants to do, when God is asking us, hey, do this, are we doing it to the brim? Are we doing it to the full? Are we doing exactly what he says? Or are we leaving space for something else to be added? You see, there's something in here. He does have that part for us to play in it, right? He wants us to get the container. He wants us to bring the container, fill it up for him to do, and not leave space. And I don't know, for me, I picture myself, my spirit, my mind. That's the container. Am I going to fill it up with what he said so that nothing else can be in there to be a part of what he wants to do? They didn't do it halfway. They did the whole way. Filled it up to the brim. No other space. No other way. It's like it's a pattern. It's something that we can look at for our obedience and our faith and see that when we it's not that he wouldn't do the miracle, but sometimes I believe he does something according to the faith that we have, right? I'm not saying that's every time. He can do whatever he wants, but sometimes we fill halfway and we get half of what we're asking. That doesn't come to the fullness of what it needs to be because we've left space for other things. Is he asking you to do something? Is he speaking something to you? And are we leaving room for something else? John 2:8. He said to them, draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast. And they took it. Let me just stop here for a second. So he asked them to fill these ceremonial water pots with water, and they filled them to the brim, and they have them now. And then he just says, immediately he says, now take them. Now take those pots that you filled and just take them to the master of the feast, the one that's supposed to test, to make sure the food's good, the wine's good, that it's not junk, to feed the people, to make sure that this is going to happen. This wedding is going to happen like it's supposed to happen. It's like the wedding coordinator, God, I love those wedding coordinators. They go through so much. Whew. But he says, take it. And they just took them. They just took them to him. Imagine this moment where they're like, we just filled them with water. They're asking for wine. And we know that we just filled them with water. But they didn't. Sometimes we maybe can't see. You can't see. It's like, I know that God, okay, this, my container's full, and so that nothing else can be added. I have this faith. And he says, now take it. Now take it. You're like, but I don't see how this is going to happen. I don't see that the water has been turned into wine. He says, take it, test it. That's what he's saying. He's like, now take this water that you put in these containers and have them tested to see that they are wine. And they did it. That's something about the faith of these servants. They're like, okay. And maybe it's just because they were scared of Mary because she said, better do what he says. I don't know. I'm not really sure. Let's just say it's faith. Like they would, imagine if you were one of those servants at that feast, at that wedding, and you were the one, you know how bad you would look if you brought water when the master of the ceremony was asking for more wine. But they did it anyway. They didn't question whether the miracle had happened or not. They just took it believing that it had. Can we take that step and walk, even though we can't see how the miracle happened, but just believe that it has and know? Scotty was sharing with our team this morning about just these moments of, healing that God had been able to use him to pray for people. And just in an instant, like somebody's hand and they were hurt and they couldn't shake hands, and they prayed, and then one of his friends like, yeah, let's go, let's shake your hand. Like, wait a second. I know we just prayed. That's the temptation of us to say, well, it might take some time, but can we just test it? I know this is difficult. I just like, we prayed that hand would be, we prayed that leg, we prayed that this sickness is gone, we prayed, whatever. All these things, we prayed. Can we believe? And say, I will test this right now. It's happened. And then the master of ceremony. So, go on to verse 9. John 2:8 and verse 9. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You, though, you have kept the good wine until now. So these water pots that these servants filled with water are just taken. We don't know if that miracle happened before, like while it was in the container or when it was poured out. It really doesn't matter. What really does matter is that I don't really know a whole lot about how wine is made. I know they crush grapes. I know they bottle it up. I know they put it away, and it takes a long time. It doesn't just happen instantly, because instantly you can have grape juice. But it takes time to make wine. But instantly, not only is this made wine, but it's made wine that's better, the best. So he calls the bridegroom over and he says, listen, people usually it's like put out the good stuff first, and then people don't really realize when they start putting out the stuff that's cheaper. And it says specifically that this master of the ceremonies, that not knowing where this came from, so he's really even just judging this off of natural wine and what he's tasted before. Sometimes we judge things off of what we know or what we can know, how it's going to happen, how it will happen, or how good it's going to be. But the thing is this isn't something that we can know. Not only was this the best wine, it has to, that it's wine that can't even be created by man. It happened in an instant. Right, he was going to measure this up to the wine of man, if you will. But there's no measure. There's no measuring stick or something that we could place against what Christ will do. It's beyond our understanding. That's why it takes faith. It's beyond what we could actually have an understanding of or have happen in the natural, or what I can do or what you can do. There's no measure for it. See, the amazing thing is that Christ isn't limited by what we know, right? We know that there's a 40% chance of this or that, or, 50% chance that this thing will come back, this cancer, or, 50% chance of marriages failing. There's a lot of percentages that I could bring up now that we might have in our mind. This percentage chance based on statistics of what, of relapse into addiction. This percentage of this or that, but Like how many times have we put that up against what God will do? And I believe in this is telling us to put it down. Like, we can't judge what he'll do based on what we know. But Jesus insisted that this miracle be put to the test. He said, just take it. He didn't say take it to the people. He said take it to the master of ceremonies so that he can see what this is. Not to the people that already might be a little tipsy. Don't take these things to people that, sometimes we just want a little encouragement in the way that we feel or the answer that we want. But Jesus didn't say, take it to the people that will just be happy no matter what. He said, take it to the person that will reject it if it is not the best, or, well, if it's not good. Oh, man. Again, there was nothing added, no time, no salt, no hitting it with a, thinking of when Moses, he hit the water, right? When God used in the old covenant, God did these miracles. And really, it's interesting that this miracle here, this first one, actually it has a similarity to things in the Old Testament, the old covenant of the water being turned to blood or the bitter waters that are sweetened. But in those moments that God speaks that, like hit the water with the stick or throw the salt in the water and it'll make it sweet. But in this is totally different because it's Christ, it's Him, it's God. And it says He doesn't need anything else, some, thing, substitute representation. He is the one that changes the water into wine. Nothing else has to be added. Nothing else has to be added. And the master of the ceremony says, you've kept the good wine. Like he calls the bridegroom over and he says, listen, most people, they put the good stuff first. You actually have the best stuff that you brought later on. You've kept the good wine until now. And I believe that in this, that God has been speaking to me and wants to speak to us, that listen, it's this thing that we've heard, but do we know that the best is yet to come? The best doesn't happen at the beginning and it just gets worse after that. That's kind of what happens in the world a lot of times, right? The natural. But with God in this is saying to us, listen, in the natural, it might get worse as time goes on. But with God, it gets better and better and better. That toward the end, it's just better. That we have to change that mindset that, it's the good old days. I've said something about this before, and that is a falsity. We remember things differently than they were. There were good times. There were bad times. You know what the thing is that our brain remembers the good times better than it does the bad times. That's why there's good old days. And we stunt ourselves. We hold ourselves back whenever we think, oh, it was just so good back then. because we hold ourselves from grabbing hold of what God wants to do right now and in the future. That we can't say like, oh, the good old days, I wish it was like this or I wish it was like that. Yeah, I mean, I want to remember in the Bible over and over, you see in the Old Testament, they put up memorial stones. They put up to remember the goodness of God, but they didn't stay there and worship it. It was just a sign for when later on they came by with their kids, and their kids are like, why are those stones stacked like that? That's interesting. That's not natural. And they're like, oh, let me tell you what happened. God was so good, and he did this for his people, and this is what happened, and this is what we saw. But they lived their life. They didn't stay there and worship the old thing that God did. Goodness. And I believe God is wanting to do something in us, in his people, in the church. He is wanting to do something like never before. And I know, I don't want to get into a lot of different things, but we've been too relaxed. We've been too much like, hey, yeah, let's come to church. Let's do it. It's fun. I'm a Christian. I'm like, whatever. And the problem is in that we get set in our ways. And when we get set in our ways, it happened to the Israelites over and over. It's just like, God did something, and then like, and all of a sudden, then they're just worshiping other idols, and they're doing all this. I don't know about you, but I see that in God's people today. I see the tendency in myself for that. But what he's saying, what he wants, is he's saying, listen, don't leave room for something else. He says, filled to the brim. Just fill it up with who I am, what I want to do, not what I did, but what I am going to do, what I am doing now. And believe and trust. It may just look like water, or you may know that water was just added, but will you believe that I am going to turn that water into wine? Will you believe that the best is yet to come, that the best... John 2:11. Says this what we've been talking about, beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and he manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. See, He wants to do this thing in your life. He wants to do something with us. He wants us to fill up to the brim and just trust that he's going to turn that into wine, that he is going to do that miracle, that he's going to bring that breakthrough, that he's going to bring those kids, that we're praying for back into relationship with him, that all these things that we've been praying for, he wants us to believe and stand in that moment. And you know why? You know what he wants to do is he wants to see his glory manifest. Because it's glory unto him. Because it shines of who he is. It's so that all will know. See, this... even this thing about that there was 6 pots, 120 to 180 gallons of wine that was far more. I mean, even to think that it was already halfway through, right? Far more than what was needed. And we can see that or believe that it was also for proof and provision. Because the next day or the week after, there was wine. There was wine that was left over that could be provision for this family. And also that they would say, were we just celebrating and so happy that we thought that this miracle happened or that it was so good? Man, because sometimes we do that. When God does this miracle in our life, and then all this stuff, we maybe think back. I was like, well, is it really the way that we thought it was? But he says, no, I want there to be this left over, something to see that's proof of what has happened. That it's not just for this moment, it's for the future. That this wine doesn't just last in this happy little moment, but when you walk out and are working in your job or the next month, the next week, that it's still there. It doesn't just last for a little while, but it is with you and doesn't lack. It doesn't leave. He wants to manifest his glory in us and through us. Deepen a trust and a faith in us. He wants to show who he is through his people. And in this, I just see that God, I say, God, where have I been not filling up and trusting you so much that I just do it all the way? Believing and having the faith that I need to come completely in trust, filled, not leaving room. We all, there's even things, being honest, in me that I've seen over this past little bit, that it's like, God, I see that I've been trying to put some of the legwork in to create some of the things that you've wanted to do. And that happened because I didn't fill to the brim just my faith and trust in you, thinking that somehow I needed to figure it out or do something. And he's like, all I want you to do is to carry the water pot. All the miracle, the provision, the thing that's going to be done has nothing to do with you. I just want you to be the water pot, to carry it, to walk with me and allow me to do what I want to do. He doesn't need you to hit the water with a stick. He doesn't need you to throw salt in it. He just needs you to fill up with that water, so that nothing else can be added. Let me stand with me.